All right, Emma, I need to talk about something that's been bugging me. I've been watching people in meetings, smart people, and there's this pause. You can see them translating in their heads before they speak English. It's costing them credibility, and honestly, it's probably costing them opportunities.
That pause is actually your brain running two full operations simultaneously. It's like trying to run high-performance software on a computer that's already maxed out. And here's what most people don't realize. This isn't just a speed problem. The science shows it's fundamentally reshaping how effectively you can think and communicate.
So today we're breaking down how to eliminate that translation step entirely. We're talking about rewiring your brain to think directly in English. No mental middleman, no cognitive bottleneck.
The neuroscience behind this is actually fascinating. We're going to explore how your brain physically changes when you do this right, plus some unexpected cognitive benefits that go way beyond just language.
We've got a tested system, specific techniques that professional interpreters use, practical hacks you can start today, and a structured plan that doesn't require you to quit your job and move to an English-speaking country. Think of this as optimization for your brain's operating system. Small, consistent changes that compound into something pretty remarkable. Let's dive in.
Here's where things get really interesting from an optimization standpoint. I want you to think about your brain like it has a backpack, a limited capacity backpack. And every time you're trying to speak English, you're deciding what to put in that backpack. Translation? That's like filling it with heavy rocks before you even start the actual work of communicating.
I love that metaphor because it maps perfectly onto what researchers call cognitive load theory. Your brain has a finite amount of working memory. We're talking about processing only 4 to 7 items at a time traditionally. When you translate, you're essentially running 2 operations simultaneously, decoding your thought in your native language, then encoding it into English. That's already pushing your cognitive limits before you've even expressed a single idea.
Right, and this is where the efficiency seekers in our audience need to pay attention. We talk all the time about treating mental energy as a finite resource, like your daily willpower or decision-making capacity. Translation is a massive leak in that system. It's like running a program in the background that's constantly draining your battery.
The research backs this up hard. Mental translation imposes what's called extraneous cognitive load. That's the unnecessary mental effort that doesn't actually contribute to learning or communication. It's pure overhead. So you're burning through your mental energy budget on the translation process itself, leaving less room for the actual content you're trying to convey or learn.
I tested this on myself during a business trip to Singapore last year. I was in back-to-back meetings, and I noticed something. The moments when I was mentally translating, even just for a split second, I'd lose the thread of the conversation. It wasn't just about language. I was missing strategic points, reading the room wrong. The cognitive cost was bleeding into everything else.
That's the hidden tax nobody talks about. But here's where it gets even more problematic, what I call native language bullying, or what researchers term L1 interference. Your first language doesn't just slow you down, it actively sabotages your English by forcing it into the wrong grammatical structure.
Wait, break that down. What does that actually look like in practice?
So imagine you're a Vietnamese speaker, and in Vietnamese you might say something that translates literally to, I go market yesterday. That's grammatically perfect in Vietnamese, no past tense marker needed on the verb. But when you translate that pattern directly into English, you get awkward constructions that immediately signal non-native speaker. The research shows this creates a double burden. You're working harder mentally, and you're producing output that sounds unnatural, which then creates social hesitation.
Social hesitation. That's the killer in professional contexts. I call this the dial-up effect. You know how in the old dial-up internet days there'd be that lag before a page loaded? That's what happens in your head when you translate. Even a 2-second delay in a meeting completely destroys your professional authority. 2 seconds is actually generous, but you're absolutely right about the authority piece. I've seen this in my own experiments. When there's a pause before you speak, people unconsciously interpret it as uncertainty or lack of expertise, even if your eventual answer is brilliant. The delay itself becomes the message. If you're in a 1-hour meeting and you're translating before every contribution, you might speak 10-15 times. That's 20 to 30 seconds of dead air where you're perceived as less competent, less quick, less authoritative. Over a year of meetings, that's hours of lost credibility, which translates to actual career costs, missed promotions, being passed over for high-stakes projects.
The ROI calculation on fixing this is insane when you frame it that way. But I want to push back on one thing. It's not just about speed. The cognitive load issue means you're also more likely to make errors when you're translating because your working memory is maxed out. You're juggling too many balls, and something's going to drop.
Fair point.
So we're not just optimizing for speed, we're optimizing for accuracy and mental sustainability. If you're burning through your cognitive budget on translation, you're going to hit mental fatigue way earlier in the day. That's fewer productive hours, worse decision-making in the afternoon, the whole cascade. And this is where the system breaks down for most learners. They don't realize they're operating with a fundamental inefficiency. They think, I just need to practice more, build more vocabulary. But they're building on a foundation of translation, which means every new word, every new phrase is adding more weight to that already overloaded backpack. How do we bypass this entire system? How do we train the brain to operate directly in English without that translation layer eating up all our cognitive resources?
We've established that translation is the enemy. But here's what gets me excited. Your brain isn't stuck this way. This is where the science gets really cool. Think of your brain like Play-Doh, not stone. It can literally reshape itself at any age through something called neuroplasticity. I love this analogy because it destroys the biggest excuse people have. I'm too old to learn a language. That's just not how brains work. But Emma, what's actually happening in there? Like, if we could peek inside someone's brain as they're making this transition from translation to direct thinking, what would we see?
Great question. So researchers have used fMRI scans, basically a brain camera, to study bilingual people. And what they found is fascinating. Bilingual individuals have measurably denser gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain responsible for problem solving, task switching, and focus. It's literally thicker, more developed.
Wait, so learning to think in English doesn't just help you speak English better, it's actually upgrading your brain's hardware for everything else you do?
Precisely. You're building cognitive infrastructure. But here's where it gets even more interesting for our optimization-minded listeners. There's this phenomenon called the foreign language effect, and it has massive implications for decision-making.
I've actually used this in my own business decisions, but I didn't know there was research behind it. Tell me what the studies show.
So researchers presented people with ethical dilemmas and financial choices, the same scenarios, but some in their native language and some in their second language. When people thought through problems in their second language, they were 1.6 times more likely to choose rational, utilitarian options over emotional ones.
1.6 times more rational? That's not a small edge. That's the difference between a good decision and a costly mistake.
Right, and there's more. Thinking in a foreign language reduces what's called myopic loss aversion. Basically, it makes you less afraid of small risks and more open to long-term gains. Your emotional brain takes a back seat.
This is why I've started doing something that probably sounds weird to people. When I'm facing a high-stakes business decision, like whether to invest in a new market or cut a product line, I force myself to think through the entire problem in English, even though I'm perfectly fluent in my native language.
That's brilliant. You're essentially using English as a rationality filter.
Precisely, because when I think in my native language, all my emotional baggage comes with it. My fear of failure, my attachment to past decisions, my ego. But when I switch to English, it's like I'm consulting with a more logical version of myself. The emotional noise drops by maybe 60–70%. The research backs this up. Your native language is wired to your emotional centers from childhood. Every word carries emotional weight, memories, associations, feelings. But your second language, it's more clinical, more analytical. You learned it through logic, not emotion. So for anyone listening who's in finance, investing, or running a business, this isn't just about learning English. This is about building a cognitive tool that makes you better at high-stakes decisions. That's a massive ROI that nobody talks about. And here's the thing. You don't need to be perfectly fluent to get this benefit. You just need to be comfortable enough to think through complex problems in English. That's the threshold where the foreign language effect kicks in. Which brings us back to the core question. How do you actually train your brain to reach that threshold? Because understanding the science is one thing, but we need a practical system.
So we've established that translation is the enemy. But here's the practical question everyone's asking. How do I actually stop doing it? Because knowing you shouldn't translate and being able to stop are two completely different things.
Right, and this is where most people get stuck. They understand the concept intellectually, but their brain still automatically reaches for their native language. It's like trying to break any deeply ingrained habit. You need a replacement behavior, not just willpower.
So let's talk about the minimum effective dose here. The single biggest change I made, and this is non-negotiable if you're serious, is ditching bilingual dictionaries completely. When you look up a word, use an English to English dictionary. Not English to Spanish, not English to Vietnamese, English to English.
This is actually backed by solid research. Monolingual dictionaries are critical for advanced learners because they force you to understand vocabulary through context rather than translation. You're building that direct pathway we talked about, word to meaning, not word to translation to meaning.
And I know what people are thinking, but that's harder. I don't understand the definition if it's in English. Yeah, at first, but here's the thing. That struggle is the point. Your brain is actually creating new neural pathways instead of reinforcing the old translation highway.
Plus, you can start with learners' dictionaries that use simpler English to define words. You don't need to jump straight into Oxford English Dictionary definitions. There are resources specifically designed for this.
Now, dictionaries are reactive. You use them when you encounter a word you don't know. What about being proactive? This is where the labeling phase comes in, and it's honestly one of the most effective hacks I've tested.
Oh, I love this one. You're basically turning your entire house into an English user interface.
Precisely. Get sticky notes or a label maker and start labeling everything in your environment. Not with translations, just the English word. Your refrigerator gets a label that says refrigerator. Your door says door. Your coffee maker says coffee maker.
And this taps into something called total physical response in language learning research. When you physically interact with objects while seeing the English word, you're creating a direct association. You're not thinking door equals puerta equals that thing I open. You're thinking door while touching the door, opening the door, closing the door.
The visual aid component is huge here. Every time you reach for your coffee maker, you see the word. You're getting dozens of repetitions per day without any extra study time. It's passive exposure that builds active vocabulary.
And you can level this up. Don't just label nouns, label actions too. Put a note on your light switch that says turn on, turn off. On your faucet, hot water, cold water. You're building verb associations the same way.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Emma, you want to talk about action narration because this is your favorite technique.
It is. So action narration is what it sounds like. You narrate your life like you're describing a movie script. But here's the key. You do it in real time in simple English as you're performing the action. Give us an example of what this actually sounds like. Sure. So let's say you're making breakfast. You don't just make breakfast silently. You say out loud, or even just in your head if you're in public, I am opening the refrigerator. I am taking out the eggs. I am cracking an egg into the pan. I am turning on the stove. And this feels ridiculous at first, right? Like you're talking to yourself like a crazy person. Absolutely ridiculous. But here's what's happening. You're linking verbs directly to movements. Research shows that thinking in simple sentences during daily activities trains your brain to use English naturally without the stress of complex grammar. You're not trying to construct perfect sentences. You're just describing what's happening.
This is the physical action component again. Your brain is experiencing opening while you open, pouring while you pour. It's the same principle as total physical response. You're creating embodied memory, not just abstract vocabulary. And the beauty is you can do this anywhere. Walking to work, I am walking down the street. I am crossing the road. I am entering the building. Doing laundry, I am sorting the clothes. I am adding detergent. I am starting the machine. The key is keeping it simple. You're not trying to impress anyone with your vocabulary. Use present continuous tense, I am doing X, because it's the most natural for describing ongoing actions. Don't worry about sounding sophisticated.
Right, and this is where people often mess up. They try to narrate in complex sentences and get frustrated when they can't. But a 5-year-old doesn't say, I am meticulously arranging the dishes in the dishwasher. They say, I am putting the plates in. That's all you need.
Let me break down the mental model here because this is crucial. Most people think of vocabulary like this. English word equals native language word equals concept. So apple equals manzana equals the mental image of a fruit. That's 3 steps.
And every time you access that word, you're running through all 3 steps. It's inefficient and slow.
English word equals concept, just 2 steps. Apple directly triggers the mental image of the fruit, no translation layer in between. And that's what labeling and action narration do. They build that direct connection. It's like creating a new file path in your brain. Instead of going through the translation folder every time, you're creating a shortcut directly to the meaning. And here's the thing, this doesn't happen overnight. You're literally rewiring neural pathways. But the more you practice these techniques, the stronger those direct pathways become and the weaker the translation pathways get. I'd say from my own experience, after about 2 weeks of consistent labeling and action narration, you start noticing moments where you think of the English word first, like you'll reach for your keys and think keys before you think of the word in your native language. Those moments are gold. They're proof it's working. Those are the micro wins you need to track, because this process can feel invisible at first. You're not suddenly fluent, but you are building the infrastructure for fluency. Start with high-frequency words and actions. Don't label your ottoman or narrate, I am calibrating the thermostat. Focus on the things you do and see every single day. Your bathroom routine, your morning coffee, your commute. That's where you'll get the most repetitions.
And combine these techniques. Label your environment and narrate your actions. Use an English-to-English dictionary when you encounter new words. These aren't separate strategies. They're a system that reinforces the same core principle: direct association, no translation. The compound effect is real. Each technique alone is helpful, but together they create an immersive environment even if you're not in an English-speaking country. Which brings up an interesting question. What about when you're actually trying to have conversations? Because narrating your breakfast is one thing, but speaking with another person is a completely different challenge.
We've talked about thinking in English, but here's the thing. Knowing you should think in English and actually being able to do it are two completely different problems. Your brain needs training wheels, and that's where shadowing comes in.
Yes, shadowing is basically the copycat method, and it's not some random language hack. Elite simultaneous interpreters use this technique to train their brains. The concept is simple. You listen to native English audio and repeat it immediately, like an echo. You're literally copying the sounds, rhythm, and intonation in real time.
I love this because it's so testable. When I first tried shadowing, I thought it would feel awkward, and it did for about 3 minutes, but then something clicked. My mouth started moving before my brain could translate. That's the whole point, right? You're bypassing the translation step entirely.
Correct. And there's actual neuroscience behind why this works. It taps into what's called the phonological loop. That's the part of your working memory that holds sound patterns. When you shadow, you're forcing your brain to hold English sounds in this loop and reproduce them immediately. Over time, these patterns get encoded into long-term memory. You're literally building new neural pathways.
So it's like you're training your brain's echo chamber? The more you do it, the faster and more automatic those English patterns become?
Perfect analogy. And here's where the data gets interesting. A study tracked language learners who did shadowing practice for 8 weeks. The results? They showed a mean gain of 2.13 points in fluency scores compared to people using traditional study methods. That's significant. We're talking about measurable improvement in how smoothly they could speak. But let me push back on something. 8 weeks sounds like a long time. What's the minimum effective dose here? Because I tested this myself, and I found that 15 minutes of focused shadowing gave me better results than 2 hours of passive listening to podcasts. Why is that? Because passive listening is just that, passive. Your brain isn't doing the work. With shadowing, you're actively engaging multiple systems at once, listening, processing, and speaking. It's high-intensity training for your language circuits. 15 minutes of that is exhausting in the best way. Your brain is forced to work at maximum capacity, which is what drives neuroplasticity.
Right, and I noticed something else. After a few sessions, I stopped pausing mid-sentence to search for words. The research backs this up, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Regular shadowing practice enhances what's called verbal response time. That's the speed at which you can produce language. When you're translating in your head, there's this lag. You think in your native language, translate, then speak. Shadowing eliminates that lag because you're training your brain to produce English directly. No translation layer.
So it's moving English from your thinking brain, the conscious, effortful part, to your muscle memory, like learning to type without looking at the keyboard.
That's a great comparison. And there's another benefit that often gets overlooked: comprehensibility and intelligibility. The same research showed that shadowing training helps learners sound more natural and be understood more easily by native speakers. You're not just learning words, you're learning the melody of English, the rhythm, the stress patterns, the way native speakers actually talk.
So let's get practical. What does a good shadowing session actually look like? Because I've seen people do this wrong. They just mumble along to a podcast while doing dishes. That's not going to cut it.
No, it won't. Here's the protocol. First, choose audio that's slightly above your current level. Not so hard that you're lost, but challenging enough that you have to focus. TED Talks, audiobook samples, or even TV show clips work great. Second, use headphones. You need to hear every detail. Third, and this is crucial, shadow out loud. Not in your head. Your mouth needs to move.
And the timing? Are you shadowing word for word, or is there a delay?
There's usually a split-second delay. You're echoing what you just heard. But the goal is to get as close to real time as possible. At first, you might be a full sentence behind. That's fine. With practice, you'll close that gap. Some people even do synchronized shadowing, where they try to speak at the same time as the audio. That's advanced mode.
I found that recording myself was a game changer. You think you're nailing it, and then you play it back and realize your intonation is completely flat. It's humbling, but that feedback loop accelerates improvement.
Yes, recording yourself is like having a mirror for your speech. You can compare your version to the original and spot the gaps. Are you dropping word endings? Is your rhythm off? That awareness is what drives correction. So here's my optimization framework for shadowing. Start with 5 minutes a day for the first week, just to build the habit without burning out. Week 2, bump it to 10 minutes. By week 3, you're at 15 minutes, which seems to be the sweet spot for most people. And here's the key. Do it every single day. Consistency beats intensity with this technique. Agreed. And one more thing, vary your sources. Don't just shadow one person's voice. Listen to different accents, different speaking speeds, different contexts. A business presentation sounds different from a casual conversation. Your brain needs exposure to that variety. What about the fluency jump you mentioned earlier? When does that actually happen? Most people report a noticeable shift around the 3 to 4 week mark. Suddenly, English phrases start coming out without conscious effort. You're not constructing sentences anymore. You're just speaking. That's when you know the technique is working. The patterns have moved from your working memory into your procedural memory. It's like the difference between thinking about how to ride a bike and just riding it. Once it's in procedural memory, it's automatic. Correct. And that's the ultimate goal here, to make English feel as automatic as your native language. Shadowing is the fastest route I've found to get there. So we've covered how to train your brain to produce English automatically. But here's the next question. What if you're already thinking in English, but you're still making mistakes? How do you actually correct those errors without falling back into translation mode?
We've talked about why thinking in English matters and the science behind it. Now comes the part everyone's been waiting for, the actual system. I'm calling this the 30-day brain rewire plan, and I've tested every single week of this on myself.
And this is where the research gets really interesting. There's solid evidence that consistency beats intensity every single time. One study found that practicing for just 2 minutes daily for 30 days led to noticeable improvements in the speed of thought formation. Not 2 hours on the weekend, 2 minutes every day.
That's my golden rule for this whole plan. I'd rather you do 2 minutes every single day than burn yourself out with a 2-hour marathon once a week. Your brain needs repetition, not exhaustion. So week 1 is what I call the noun bomb.
I love this name. What's the actual technique?
You're going to label 50 objects in your environment, not in a notebook. Physically label them. Sticky notes on your coffee maker that says coffee maker, on your lamp that says lamp, on your door that says door. The goal is to make English unavoidable in your physical space.
And you're also switching your phone to English, right?
Correct. Phone, computer, any device you use daily. This is the lowest effort, highest impact change you can make. You're already looking at your phone 100 times a day. Might as well make each glance a micro practice session.
What I find fascinating is that this taps into something called environmental cueing. Your brain starts associating your physical space with English, which makes the language feel less foreign and more like home.
Week 2 is where it gets more active. I call this the internal narrator. You're going to spend 5 minutes thinking out loud in English while doing chores. Washing dishes? Narrate it. I'm picking up the plate. The water's too hot. I need more soap.
This sounds ridiculous, but it's actually brilliant. You're forcing your brain to form thoughts in English in real time, not translating a script you've prepared.
It feels weird at first. I tested this while making breakfast, and I sounded like a toddler learning to speak. I am cracking the egg. The egg is broken. Oh no, shell in the pan. But here's the thing. That awkwardness is the point. You're building the neural pathway.
And you're doing it during activities that don't require much cognitive effort, so your brain has bandwidth to focus on the language. Chores are perfect because they're automatic.
Week 3 is the shadow technique. You're going to spend 10 minutes a day shadowing a podcast. Not just listening, actually speaking along with the host, trying to match their rhythm, intonation, everything.
This is where the research on chunks comes in. Studies show that learning set phrases like, "that sounds good," or "I was thinking about," allows for faster retrieval and reduces the need to build sentences from scratch. When you shadow, you're absorbing these chunks naturally.
I use podcasts at 0.75x speed when I'm starting with a new accent or topic. It gives me time to actually keep up. Then I gradually increase to normal speed. The key is to pick content you're genuinely interested. If you're bored, you won't stick with it. What kind of podcasts work best? Conversational ones. Avoid super technical or academic content in week 3. You want natural speech patterns. Interviews, storytelling, casual discussions. I started with a comedy podcast because I was already motivated to listen.
And then week 4 is the big one, the deep dive. You're switching one entire hobby to English.
This is where the magic happens. Pick something you already do regularly, cooking, gaming, fitness, whatever, and do it entirely in English. If you cook, watch English cooking videos, read English recipes, think through your meal prep in English. I did this with yoga. I switched to English language yoga videos, and within a week, I was thinking inhale and exhale instead of translating those words. The movements became linked to the English terms directly. That's the goal. You're creating a context where English is the default, not the translation. And because it's a hobby, you're motivated to engage with it. You're not forcing yourself to study. You're just doing something you enjoy in a different language. There's actually research showing that just 1 week of focused language learning has a positive impact on alertness and focus, and that's maintained with about 5 hours of study per week. So by week 4, you're not just learning English, you're sharpening your overall cognitive function. Don't try to do all 4 weeks at once. Week 1 is just labeling and switching your phone. That's it. Week 2, you add the narration. Week 3, you add shadowing. Week 4, you add the hobby switch. You're stacking habits, not overwhelming yourself. And if you miss a day, you just start again the next day. The 2-minute rule applies here too. If you only have 2 minutes, do 2 minutes of narration. If you only have time to label 5 objects instead of 50, label 5. The consistency is what rewires your brain, not perfection. What's the biggest mistake people make with a plan like this? They try to do too much too fast. They label 50 objects, switch their phone, start narrating, and try shadowing all on day 1. Then they burn out by day 3 and quit. This is a 30-day plan for a reason. Each week builds on the last. The other mistake is picking content that's too difficult. If you're shadowing a podcast and you don't understand 80% of what's being said, you're not going to absorb the chunks. You need comprehensible input. Start easier than you think you need to. You can always level up. I started shadowing a podcast for kids learning English, and it was perfect because the speech was clear and the phrases were simple. No ego in the learning process. None. And here's the thing. By week 4, you'll notice something weird. You'll catch yourself thinking in English without trying. You'll be in the shower, planning your day, and realize you're doing it in English. That's when you know the rewiring is working. That's the moment where it stops being a technique and starts being a habit. Your brain has created a new default pathway. Once you hit that point, you don't need the plan anymore. You just keep going. The 30 days are just the scaffolding to build the structure. After that, it's self-sustaining. So if someone's listening right now and wants to start today, what's the absolute first step? Grab 10 sticky notes. Label 10 objects in the room you're in right now. Then switch your phone to English. That's it. Don't overthink it. Don't plan the whole 30 days. Just do those 2 things today. And tomorrow, label 10 more objects. By the end of week 1, you'll have 50 labels and an English phone. You're already rewiring your brain without even realizing it. I think what makes this plan work is that it's not about willpower. It's about environment design. You're making English the path of least resistance. That's the whole philosophy. I don't believe in relying on motivation. Motivation fades. Systems don't. This plan is a system that works even when you don't feel like it. We've given everyone the roadmap, but I know people are going to have questions about what happens after the 30 days. Do you just stop, or is there a maintenance phase?
So here's what it really comes down to. Thinking in English isn't some mystical talent reserved for people who started as kids. It's an engineering problem with a solution. You're literally redesigning the pathways in your brain, and the blueprint is simpler than most people think.
And that's what makes this so exciting from a neuroscience perspective. We're not just talking about language acquisition, we're talking about cognitive enhancement. The same rewiring that eliminates translation also makes you a better decision maker, a clearer thinker. It's like you're installing an operating system upgrade while learning a skill.
Right. And the minimum effective dose here is shockingly small. If you take nothing else from this conversation, take this. Start with environmental labeling today. 10 sticky notes. That's it. Then tomorrow, narrate 1 routine activity in English. You're not committing to some grueling study schedule. You're making English unavoidable in tiny, friction-free ways.
The beauty is that these techniques stack. Labeling creates the foundation, narration builds fluency, shadowing automates the patterns, and then immersion through hobbies makes it self-sustaining. By week 4, you're not forcing yourself to think in English. English is just there. It becomes the path of least resistance.
And you'll know when it clicks. It's not gradual. There's a moment when you catch yourself thinking in English without trying. That's your signal that the rewiring worked. From there, it compounds on itself. Every conversation, every meeting, every email gets easier because you're not running that translation tax anymore.
One thing I want people to remember, your brain is more adaptable than you think. Neuroplasticity doesn't expire at 25. Whether you're 30, 40, 50, the mechanisms still work. You just need the right stimulus applied consistently.
Don't wait until you have the perfect